Marcus Holloway stood in the middle of the Hartford Golf Club's main hall, champagne tilted in his hand, voice loud enough to carry across the chandelier light. He was telling 20 people about Daniel Reeves' rusted Ford and small life, about the kind of man who shows up to a reunion with calluses on his hands. Daniel stood near the bar, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. Then heels clicked across the marble, heads turned. Claire Whitmore crossed the room, stopped beside Daniel, and laid one hand on his arm. She looked at Marcus and said 4 words, "He's with me." What happened in the 6 hours before that moment is the part nobody at the reunion knew. 6 hours earlier, Daniel Reeves stood in front of the bathroom mirror in a 2-story house in West Hartford, trying to remember how his wife had taught him to knot a Windsor. The cufflinks were on the sink. The blazer was on the doorknob. His tie hung around his collar in 2 loose loops, refusing to behave the way it had behaved when Sarah's hands had done it. Lily sat on the 3rd stair from the top, chin on her knees, watching him through the open door. She was 9 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, and she was holding a folded handkerchief embroidered with a small letter S. "Daddy, I know. You're doing it wrong. I know that too." She walked down to him in her socks and held out the handkerchief. Daniel took it, ran his thumb over the embroidery, and put it carefully into his inside pocket. Then he bent down and kissed the top of her head and stayed there a moment longer than he needed to. "I won't be late," he said. "You will," she said. "You always say that, and you always are. Mrs. Alden is coming at 7. She's bringing the casserole you don't like. It tastes like wet bread." "I know." He smiled at her. She smiled back, gap in her front teeth, and ran back up the stairs to set up her drawing pad on the kitchen table. Across the city, on the 14th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Connecticut River, Claire Whitmore was rereading a keynote she had already rewritten twice. Her assistant stood in the doorway with a tablet in her hand and a look on her face that suggested bad news. "Ma'am, the board of the Hartford Golf Club is, as a reminder, conservative. They don't appreciate surprises." "Noted," and Marcus Holloway confirmed his attendance. Claire's pen stopped. "Of course he did. You don't have to go. Technically. The endowment release can be sent. I have to go." Claire set the pen down. "Halcyon's name is on the scholarship. The check goes with a face." She turned back to the window and watched the river run gray under a sky that had decided to be autumn early. She was 35 years old, 3 years into running one of Connecticut's most respected firms, and she had never once met the man who owned it. She had been told he preferred it that way. Daniel pulled into the gravel lot of the Hartford Golf Club at 6:45 and sat in his truck for a full minute before opening the door. The Ford was 20 years old. The leather on the steering wheel had been worn smooth by Sarah's hands first, and then his. He had not set foot inside this building since he was 22. In the entry hall, a coatroom attendant took his jacket, looked at the flannel shirt under his blazer, and made the small face people make when they are too professional to say anything. Daniel walked into the main room and started scanning for faces he recognized. Behind him, a voice said, "Excuse me, do you have a light?" He turned. A woman in a black dress, dark hair pinned back, eyes that registered him in one quick, clean pass. He patted his pockets out of reflex. "Sorry, I don't smoke." "Neither do I," she said. His did. She gestured with her chin toward an older man behind her who was already laughing about something else, cigar gone cold. "Thank you anyway." She looked at his shoulder where the collar of the flannel showed under the blazer. Half a second. No comment. Then she walked away. Daniel stood there with his hand still half raised in his pocket and his pulse doing something it had not done in 4 years. "Reeve." He closed his eyes briefly before he turned. Marcus Holloway was coming at him with a bourbon in one hand and the same teeth he had carried since the 11th grade. He threw an arm around Daniel's shoulders the way men do when they want a room to see them being friendly. "You actually came. Brave man." Daniel lifted Marcus's arm off his shoulder, set it down gently between them, and said, "Marcus." Dinner was at a long table under 3 pendant lights and a single sagging chandelier. Marcus had arranged the seating. Daniel knew this because the place card opposite his own read Holloway in handwriting. Daniel still remembered from yearbook margins. Marcus started light. He talked about the new Porsche, the house in Avon, the wife whose father was a state senator. Each sentence was a small knife pointed across the salad course. Daniel ate slowly, nodded when nodding was required, and gave nothing back. At the head of the table, Claire sat among 3 board members of the club, her chair turned slightly toward the room. She had been raised to listen to entire rooms while appearing to listen to one conversation. She was listening to the one across from Marcus. She watched Daniel cut a piece of bread and butter it. The angle of the knife, the way he set it down without sound, the way he thanked the server twice, the second time by name, when nobody else at his table thanked her once. "So what is it you actually do now, Reeve?" Marcus said. "Still doing what was it? Carpentry?" A laugh from 2 seats down. "Architectural consulting," Daniel said. "Small homes, mostly. Birdhouses?" The laugh got bigger. Marcus was riding it now. At that moment, the club's facilities manager came up behind the head table, leaned to whisper to the chair of the alumni committee, and the chair's face went through several different shades of polite alarm. Claire caught the words structural and chandelier and main hall. Marcus, overhearing, waved a hand. "Call an engineer, Jesus. We're trying to eat." Daniel set his fork down, touched the back of the manager's elbow, and said quietly, "Show me." He was gone for 8 minutes. When he came back, the blazer was slightly off square at the shoulders, and there was a thin streak of dust along his right cuff. He sat down, picked up his fork, and continued his meal. The manager went straight to Claire and said something into her ear. Whatever it was, it took less than 15 seconds to say, and Claire's expression did not change while she listened. When the manager finished, she said quietly, "Thank you. Please convey to the club that no engineer needs to be called tonight." And the manager nodded with the precise face of a person who has just received permission to do something they had wanted to do anyway. Claire turned her chair half an inch toward the long table. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at his wrist instead. He had pushed his sleeve up half an inch to reach the breadbasket, and the watch on his wrist caught the candlelight for exactly 1 second. White face, thin gold case, the Calatrava lettering at 6 o'clock. A limited run. She had seen that watch once, in one photograph, in one folder that she was not supposed to open, and had opened anyway in her first month as CEO. The folder had been labeled Founder, Personal, Reference Only. The face in the photograph had been blurred for privacy. The watch had not. Her stomach did something cold. Under the table, she opened her phone and typed a single message to Greg Sanderson, the outside counsel for Halcyon Holdings, a man she trusted because he was the only attorney she had ever met who refused to flatter her. "Is he here tonight?" 3 dots. Then, "Don't ask me that, Claire. Just be careful what you say in that room." She put the phone down. She picked up her wine. She watched Daniel Reeve eat his salad like a man who had no idea that the woman at the head of the table had just stopped breathing. Claire stood up, made an excuse about needing air, and walked the long way around the room toward the bar so she could pass behind Daniel's chair. She did not stop. She did not look down, but she let her hand brush the back of his chair as she went by. A contact so brief no one at the table registered it except the man it was meant for. She continued to the bar and asked the bartender for 2 glasses of still water. While she waited, she opened the Founder file her assistant had pushed to her phone, scrolled past the redactions to the single permitted reference image, and looked at the photograph she had stared at exactly once, 3 years ago, on her first day in the corner office. The man in the photograph had his face blurred. His left wrist rested on a desk. The watch on it was clean and white and small. She closed the file. Behind her, 3 steps past the bar, she heard Marcus's voice change pitch, and she paused. "Hey, Dan," Marcus was saying. How's Sarah doing?" "Oh wait, sorry, I forgot. That was a few years ago, right? Cancer, wasn't it?" The table went still. A woman 2 seats down from Marcus drew in a breath through her teeth and said, "Marcus." "Jesus Christ." Daniel set his fork down. He did not raise his voice. He did not move at all for 2 full seconds. Then he looked at Marcus and said, in a voice you had to lean forward to hear, "You don't get to say her name." Marcus put his hands up in mock surrender, but his eyes were bright. He thought he had found the seam. Claire came back to the table carrying 2 glasses of water. She did not sit down where she had been sitting before. She put 1 glass beside Daniel's plate and the other in front of the empty chair to his right, and she pulled that chair out and sat down in it. Half the table turned. The other half pretended not to. Marcus opened his mouth. Claire did not look at him. She looked at Daniel. "I owe you a thank you," she said. "The chandelier. You saved me from giving a speech under a structural hazard." Daniel looked up, mildly surprised that she knew. It was nothing. I doubt that. Marcus tried to recover. Claire, you don't have to entertain. Marcus, still not looking at him. When I want your input on who I sit next to, I'll ask. The table made a sound that was not laughter but was related to it. 2 seats down, a man who had been silent all evening hid a smile in his napkin. Across from him, the woman who had said Jesus Christ a minute earlier exhaled in a way that made it clear she had spent 20 years waiting to hear that sentence delivered out loud, and was satisfied with the version she had just heard. Marcus sat down. He did not sit down well. The chair caught the edge of his suit jacket, and he had to half stand again to free it, and by the time he was settled again, the moment had moved on without him. Daniel glanced at Claire. For the first time in the evening, her eyes held longer than a heartbeat. She did not look away. Are you all right? She asked, low enough that no one else heard. I've had this conversation in my head for 20 years, Daniel said. It's smaller in person. Claire almost smiled. The alumni committee chair tapped a microphone at the front of the room and announced that the scholarship portion of the evening was about to begin. Marcus, who had arranged with the chair to give the introductory remarks, stood up too quickly, smoothed his jacket, and walked to the small stage with the precise gait of a man who has decided to make a point. He took the microphone and looked across the room. Friends, Marcus said, tonight we honor those who have built something. Those who took the foundation this school gave us and built upward, and we welcome those who came tonight. His eyes drifted to table 4 to remind us that some chapters never get a sequel. A few people laughed. Several didn't. Daniel sat very still. His right hand, under the tablecloth, tightened around the napkin and let it go. Claire stood up. She did not hurry. She walked to the stage, took the second microphone off its stand, and faced the room. Marcus's smile widened. He thought she was joining him. Before we continue, Claire said, and her voice was conversational, almost bored, I want to correct something in Marcus's introduction. The room quieted. He referred to a guest at table 4 as someone still searching for the sequel to his story. That's incorrect. She turned her head. Her eyes landed on Daniel. Daniel Reeve is here as my guest tonight. He's with me. The room stopped. Marcus's smile froze on his face like wax that had been left too close to a flame. 2 board members at the front looked at each other in a way that meant they had never, in 3 years of dinners and galas and silent auctions, heard Claire Whitmore claim anyone in public. The wife of one of them, a woman named Eleanor, who had known Claire since she was a junior associate, sat back in her chair and said, very softly, well, a waiter near the kitchen door stopped in mid-step with a tray of empty dessert plates, and did not put them down because to put them down would have made noise. Daniel met her eyes and felt something in his chest pull tight. He understood what she was doing. He understood, with a clarity that hurt, that she did not know who she was doing it for. She was doing it because the room had been unfair to a stranger, and she had decided that the room was wrong. That was all. Claire stepped off the stage, walked across the room without hurrying, and sat back down in the chair beside him. She did not look at Daniel. She picked up her water glass and took one small sip. Marcus stood at the microphone for another 3 seconds, opened his mouth, closed it, and walked off the stage. Someone else, an alumna with a clipboard, stepped up smoothly and began the scholarship portion as if nothing had just happened, which was its own kind of mercy. The room exhaled. Not all at once. In small, staggered breaths along each table, like a string of lamps coming back on after a power cut. The scholarship presentations went forward. Names were read. Polita applause. 2 recipients walked to the front and accepted envelopes and said the things people say when they have rehearsed gratitude. Daniel, at table 4, applauded each of them at exactly the right tempo. Without turning her head, Claire said to Daniel, "You didn't deserve that, whoever you are." He did not answer. His hand on the table trembled once and was still. There was a 15-minute break before the second half of the program. People drifted to the terrace, to the bar, to the long hallway with the trophy cases. Marcus disappeared in the direction of the men's room with his collar damp. Daniel excused himself, made his way through the side hall, and stopped at a tall window at the far end that looked out across the dark golf course. He stood with one hand on the frame and the other in his pocket, breathing the way men breathe when they have just stopped themselves from doing something they would have regretted. Behind him, soft on the carpet, Claire's heels. She stopped a few steps away. "I should apologize," she said. I made that a bigger moment than you wanted. He turned his head. The smile he gave her was very tired. I've spent 20 years pretending Marcus's voice didn't matter to me, he said. You did in 5 seconds what I never could. She was quiet for a beat. Why did you come tonight? He thought about it. He thought about the handkerchief in his pocket and the casserole that tasted like wet bread and the way Lily had said you always say that and you always are. My daughter asked, he said. She wanted me to have friends. From before her, Claire let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but her eyes did not laugh. Something in the answer reached a part of her that had not been reached in a long time. She knew, because she had read it in a personnel summary she should never have opened, that the founder of Halcyon Holdings had lost his wife years ago and had a young daughter. She did not ask the next question. She was not going to be the person who asked the next question. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his face changed. The whole shape of it changed. He turned the phone toward her without thinking, the way a parent will turn a photograph toward whoever is nearest. On the screen was a photograph of a small girl in a kitchen, holding up a tray of peanut butter cookies that were black around the edges, grinning with one front tooth missing. The caption read, "Daddy, these turned out edible-ish." Claire laughed, a real one, small, warm, surprised out of her. "She has your eyes," she said. "Sarah's nose." He said the name without flinching. The silence afterward was long, but it was not heavy. Outside the window, a small flock of geese cut a low line across the dark of the golf course, calling once and then gone. At the end of the corridor, half in shadow, Greg Sanderson stood with his phone in his hand. He had been watching the two of them at the window for the better part of a minute. He looked at his phone, looked at them again, and typed a message. Claire felt the buzz in her clutch, glanced down and read, "Library room, 5 minutes. Now." She closed her eyes for half a second. "I have to take this," she said. "I'll be back." Daniel nodded. He did not ask. He watched her go. The library room of the Hartford Golf Club smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Greg Sanderson stood next to the desk with his bow tie loosened and a glass of whiskey in his hand that he had not touched. He was 61 years old, an attorney for 15 of those years to a man who paid him to keep secrets and tell hard truths. Claire closed the door behind her. "Tell me," she said. Greg let out a breath that he had been holding for what looked like the entire evening. "I have been his attorney for 15 years. I drafted Halcyon Holdings' founding documents. I held the keys when his wife was sick. I cannot tell you what you are about to figure out, Claire, but I will not lie to you when you ask the right question." Claire stood very still by the door. "Is he the principal?" Greg did not answer with words. He turned and opened a leather folio on the desk, took out a single page, and turned it so she could read it. It was the front sheet of a notarized trust instrument. Halcyon Holdings, founder and sole voting shareholder, Daniel A. Reeve. Below it, a separate schedule, an anonymous education endowment, administered under the same trust, with 7 named beneficiaries over the past decade. Halfway down the second list, Claire's eyes found the name, Marcus J. Holloway, Executive MBA Fellowship, awarded 7 years ago, $48,000. She put a hand on the back of the leather chair. For 7 years, the man who had stood on that stage and tried to humiliate Daniel Reeve had been earning his second degree on Daniel Reeve's money and had never known. Daniel had never told him. Daniel had set the fund up to be anonymous specifically so that no one would ever know. The recommendation letter on file for that fellowship, Claire realized as her eyes ran down to the bottom of the page, had been written by a man named D.A. Reeve, listed in the file as an independent reader. Greg closed the folio. "He set the endowment up after Sarah's diagnosis," Greg said. "He told me he didn't want the people he helped to ever feel they owed anyone, including him. Especially him. The reading committee is blind. He reads every application himself and votes anonymously. He has voted yes on every single one of those names on the list." Claire closed her eyes. A measurement she had used her whole career to size up men in conference rooms recalibrated, quietly, on the spot. 3 years of running Halcyon Capital. 3 years of imagining the founder as a careful absence. A name on a signature stamp. Not a man, not this man. Greg put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't owe him this knowledge, Claire. But if you go sit next to him tonight, with it sit beside him, not above him. He has had enough people standing above him for one lifetime." She nodded once. Greg left the room. She stayed for another full minute, then took out her phone and looked at the photograph of the girl with the burned cookies that Daniel had accidentally shared into the wider event group when he had meant to send it only to himself. She looked at it longer than she meant to. When she came back into the main hall, Marcus was already standing again, his color high and his jaw set, and she understood at once that he had decided to escalate. The second half of the program had just begun when Marcus Holloway pushed back his chair, stood up, and lifted his glass. There was no microphone in his hand this time. He did not need one. "Friends," he said, loud across the tables, "I think we all deserve to know who's really sitting among us tonight." The room turned. Claire was just stepping back through the side door. She stopped at the edge of the carpet and put both hands on the back of Daniel's chair, gently, as if to steady herself, but everyone who was watching understood what the gesture was. Marcus pulled his phone from his jacket. "Daniel Reeve, our humble carpenter, has been telling stories at this table all evening about his little business, his simple life, but I did some digging this week." He read off the screen. "Reeve Architectural Consulting LLC. Annual filed revenue under $50,000. A shell gentleman. A tax write-off. A man pretending to work while living off his late wife's life insurance." Several people gasped audibly. A glass clinked too loudly somewhere near the back. One man at the far end of the room stood up and said, "Marcus, that is enough." Two others laughed in the way people laugh when they're not sure yet which side will win and have decided to bet by sound alone. Marcus turned slowly toward Claire. "So forgive me," he said, "if I find it just a little curious that the chief executive officer of one of the most respected firms in Connecticut is sitting beside a man who has not filed real income in 5 years. What exactly are you with, Claire?" Claire's face went still in a way that was not embarrassment. It was the stillness of a person counting to 10 before deciding what to break. The two board members at the front, the ones who had looked at each other when she had said "he's with me," now looked at her again with new expressions, and the expression said, "We are with you, do what you need to do." She opened her mouth. Daniel's hand, on the arm of the chair, brushed her wrist. Light. Once. Then gone. She closed her mouth. Daniel stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not square his shoulders. He simply stood, hands in his pockets, and looked at Marcus the way a man looks at a problem he has decided finally to solve quietly. "Marcus," Daniel said, "sit down." There was nothing loud in the words, but the room dropped half a level. Marcus, who had been smiling, found that the hand holding the phone was shaking. He laughed, but the laugh came out wrong, and he heard it come out wrong, and his face moved through 3 expressions in less than a second. "Or what, Reeve?" Daniel did not answer right away. He looked instead around the room. He let his eyes rest briefly on every face he had sat behind in a math class once, on every man who had been in a locker room the day he had been shoved into a metal cabinet in the 11th grade, and the door had been held shut for 14 minutes, on every woman who had laughed at the moment because laughing had been easier than not. "Or nothing," he said. "I don't owe you a reckoning, Marcus. I never have. But I'm going to give you one anyway, because Claire Whitmore stood up for me tonight, and you don't get to make her wrong." He turned to Claire. "Only her." "I'm sorry," he said very quietly. "You should have heard this from me first." Daniel Reeve stood in the middle of the Hartford Golf Club's main hall, hands in his pockets, and spoke the way a man speaks when he has rehearsed nothing. "My name is Daniel Reeve. I went to West Hartford High with most of you. I am a widower. I have a 9-year-old daughter named Lily. I run a small architectural consultancy out of my garage." A pause. That part is true. What Marcus did not find in his research is that I also founded a private holding company called Halcyon Holdings after my wife was diagnosed. A sound went through the room that was not quite a gasp, but was related to one. Someone at table 6 put down a wine glass too hard. Halcyon Holdings is the sole owner of Halcyon Capital, where Claire is the chief executive officer, where Marcus, you are senior vice president of client acquisitions. Marcus had gone the color of old paper. "I have never met any of you in my professional capacity," Daniel said. "I set the structure up on purpose. After Sarah died, I wanted my daughter to grow up with a father, not a portfolio." He stopped. He looked around the room again. His voice was very level. "I'm telling you this not because it matters who I am. It doesn't. I'm telling you because Marcus just accused a woman of standing up for the wrong man. and I will not let that be the last sentence in this room tonight." He paused, and the room did not move. "For the record," he said, "Marcus, I have read every application that came through the Halcyon Trust for the past 10 years, every one of them, yours included. You wrote, in your personal statement, that you had been raised to believe that a man's worth is measured by the people he refuses to step on. I voted yes on your file. I have not been sorry about that vote until tonight." Marcus made a sound that was not a word. He turned to Claire. She was still standing behind the chair, both hands on its back, her eyes very bright but very steady. "You did not know," he said, "only for her. You stood up for me anyway. That is the part that matters." She did not nod. She did not say anything. She walked the 2 steps between them and put her hand on his forearm and stood next to him, not behind him and not in front of him. Marcus stepped back, knocked into a chair, caught himself on the table. He tried to say something about a misunderstanding. His voice broke on the second word. He looked at the faces around him and found that nobody, not a single person in that room, would meet his eye. The phone was still in his hand. He set it down on the tablecloth and did not pick it up again. At the back of the hall, a small, white-haired woman, a retired English teacher from the high school, stood up. She walked the length of the room without saying a word, took Daniel's free hand in both of hers, squeezed once, and let go. 2 others stood after her. Then 4. Greg Sanderson, against the back wall, sat down in a chair for the first time all night. Daniel asked the chair of the alumni committee for a moment, was given a nod, and walked out toward the terrace door without making any announcement. Claire followed, 1 beat behind. The terrace ran along the back of the main hall, gray stone underfoot, brass lamps spaced along the railing. The maples along the 18th fairway were turning. Daniel stood at the rail with both hands on it and watched a single yellow leaf cross the lawn in the wind. Claire came up beside him, not close, not far. The cold was sharp enough that her breath showed. For a long minute neither of them said anything. Inside, the muted sound of the dinner reassembling itself. A clatter of plates, a laugh somewhere, smaller than before. Out beyond the brass lamps, the 18th fairway dropped away into the kind of dark that small towns still have at the edges. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" she said. "When I said he's with me, you could have stopped me." He thought about it, honestly. "Because for the first time in 20 years, he said, someone stood up for me without knowing what I had, just because they thought it was right. I didn't want to take that away from either of us." She nodded slowly. She did not say anything for a while. He turned his head. "I'll have Greg brief the board on Monday. You should know who you've been working for. You deserve to know a long time ago." She almost laughed. "I think I've been working for myself, actually," she said. "Halcyon's numbers are mine. You let me run it." He nodded once. "You ran it well. I read every quarterly. I never had to step in once." She turned to look at him. "You read them?" "Every one. And you never wrote back?" "Once. The 3rd one. Then I decided it was better not to." She shook her head slowly. "Daniel Reeve. You are something else." He did not answer. They stood there for what felt like a long time. The light from the hall came through the glass doors behind them and laid 2 long shadows across the stone. "I had a speech for tonight," she said eventually. 3 paragraphs about how the Halcyon Trust represents the best of what private capital can do when it remembers who it's for. I had memorized it on the drive over. What happened to it? I gave a different one. He smiled. A small one. At the dark of the golf course. You gave a better one. Where do you go from here? She asked eventually. Home, he said. Lily's waiting up. The cookies will be gone by now. She smiled at the stone railing. Drive safe. He looked at her longer than he needed to. There is a diner on Park Road, he said. Open all night. The pie is bad. The coffee is good. He waited. If you wanted to talk more. Not tonight, necessarily. She thought about it. She thought about a folio on a library desk, and a girl with burned cookies, and a man who had read every quarterly and never written back. Tomorrow, she said. After your meeting with Greg, he nodded. He pushed off the railing and turned to go. She did not move with him. She stayed at the rail and watched the yellow leaf catch on a low branch and hold there, against the wind. Daniel. He paused at the door. Thank you for not telling me first. He looked at her over his shoulder. The light from the hall caught half his face. Thank you for standing up anyway, he said. He went inside. Sunday morning, the Park Road diner smelled like coffee and pancake batter, and the red vinyl on the booths was cracked in the same places it had been cracked for 30 years. Claire arrived first, took the booth by the window, and ordered coffee. She was wearing a navy sweater and no makeup. She looked 5 years younger than she had the night before. The bell over the door jingled. Daniel came in. He was not alone. Lily walked in front of him, pink coat zipped to her chin, a stuffed panda the size of her forearm tucked under one arm. She stopped 2 feet inside the door and looked carefully around the diner, the way 9-year-olds look at rooms they have not been told the rules of. Claire looked up. She held very still for 1 beat. Then she stood up. Daniel crouched down beside Lily and tilted his head toward the booth. "That's Miss Claire," he said. "She's a friend of Daddy's. She's the lady from the photograph I told you about." Lily considered Claire with the seriousness of a small judge. Then she held the panda up by both arms, like an introduction. "His name is Mr. Wallace. He doesn't drink coffee, but he likes pancakes." Claire crouched down to be level with her. "Mr. Wallace and I have something in common," she said. The 3 of them slid into the booth. Lily took the middle. The older waitress, who had been working that counter since before either of them was born, brought a mug of coffee for Daniel and a small glass of chocolate milk for Lily without asking. Daniel slid a brown envelope across the table. "Greg drafted it this morning," he said. "Everything you need to know. Every entity. Every decision authority." Claire put a hand on the envelope but did not open it. "Sarah was an architect too," she said. "Wasn't she?" Daniel's head came up. "How did you?" She took a small folded square of napkin from her pocket. On it, in pencil, she had sketched a cross-section of a staircase bracket, the exact joint pattern she had stared at last night, after she had gone home, after she had been unable to sleep. "I've seen that joint before," she said. "In a house I almost bought 5 years ago. In Weathersfield. The realtor told me the original architect had passed away. She didn't know the name." Daniel looked at the napkin for a long time. He smoothed it once with his thumb. "That was our first house," he said. "I sold it after." Lily, between them, did not understand the conversation, but she understood the air around it. She reached out and set Mr. Wallace down very gently on the table between the 2 coffee mugs, as if balancing something. Claire did not move her hand off the envelope. Daniel did not move his off the table. "I think I have been walking around your wife's buildings for years," Claire said, "and didn't know it." He nodded slowly. "She would have liked you." Outside the diner window, a Sunday autumn light came down across Park Road, across the parked Ford with its worn steering wheel, across a sedan that Claire would later realize she had also parked under the same light without thinking about it. A church bell rang twice from a block over. A man walked his dog past the window and did not look in. Inside the booth, 3 reflections sat in the glass. A man, a woman, a small girl with 1 front tooth missing, and a stuffed panda between their hands. Neither of them had been looking.